Welcome back, YouTubers. In this episode of Java Programming Tutorials for Beginners, we're going to be talking about classes. Finally, the big topic. I know you all have been looking forward to this, and it's actually quite a large topic to discuss all in one video, so I'm going to break it out into two separate videos. This first video is going to cover just the basics. It's going to get you the bare minimum so that you can start programming and working immediately. The second video is going to cover some more advanced topics and going to go more in depth into certain areas. So if you want to just learn the minimum you need to get started, this is the video for you. So with that, let's get started. What is a class? Well, my definition of a class is basically a bunch of methods and variables that have been gathered together to represent a concept or serve some purpose. You can sort of think of classes as a way of organizing your code base conceptually. That said, there's a couple of components of the class that I want to talk about in this video. Specifically, we'll cover the constructor, we'll cover methods within a class, we'll cover class variables, and we'll talk a little bit about public and private, and we'll probably cover getter, setter methods and things of that sort. The last part of the video, I want to show a quick example, and then we'll wrap up. So let's get started. To create a class, so looking at the screen, we have our standard Hello World example. Looks the same as it always has. To create a class in Java, what you want to do is, there are a couple of different ways to do this, but the way I always do it is go over to your default package or whatever package you're working in, right-click on it, select New, Class. That's all it takes. Name your class. Let's go ahead and call this class dog. It's going to be a public class. Everything else we can just leave the defaults. Click Finish, and it makes a new file for us. It's dog.java. You'll notice the difference here. There is no public static void main. We could put that in here, but we don't want to, because when we run our program, we want to run the program from our hello world main.java file. This is purely going to be to lay out the dog class. Okay, so let's look a little bit at the dog class. You'll see the class keyword, and that's really one of the two keywords you need to define a class in Java. The other one is public. After those two keywords, you then type in the name that you want your class to be. In this case we have dog, and then you use an open bracer and followed by a closed bracer. So anything contained within these two braces is within the dog class, and that's pretty much it. That's all there is to it. So next thing I wanted to cover is the constructor of a class. You'll see a little bit more why you need this when we do our example, but for now let's just say that when you want to create an instance of a class, you will need to call the constructor more often than not. So to do that, you do public dog, and that's it. The constructor can be a private method. There are some design patterns that do so, but we're not going to get into that. We'll always use public, at least for these two videos anyway. The next word has to be, for the constructor, has to match up to the class name. After that comes your list of parameters that this method will take. And then you get to define the constructor method. You may need to do things in here to initialize your class. And we're actually going to do some things in there, but first we need to create some class variables. Oftentimes one of the things you do in a constructor is to initialize your variables, which is what we'll be doing. So how do you create a class variable? Previously, anytime we've done coding, we have declared our variables within a method. You can also declare variables outside of methods in the class. So for example, I just made the age variable, and you notice that if I were to make an age variable in a method, it highlights the name of the variable a different color. We'll get rid of that yellow underline, so so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, well, whatever. Anyways, it's light brown. Whereas if you declare a variable within a class, it is blue. And that just basically tells you that this is a class variable. Also notice over here in your outline view, you have the class variable listed here. And that's basically how you declare variables. So I want my dog class to contain the age of the dog. I also want it to contain a string that will store the color of the dog, whether the dog has brown spots, or it's a chocolate colored dog, or it has white hair. We'll store that as a string value within the color class variable. And I think that's, well, let's do one more thing just so it shows an example. Let's create a Boolean, and we're going to call it alive. Alright, so for our constructor, let's go ahead and set that. We'll do a default constructor, and we're going to specifically call it out here. A default constructor is basically a constructor that does not take any parameters. And in this case, because there are no parameters, we need to just set the variables to be whatever their default values should be. So in this case, the age, let's just set it to 0. The color, we'll just set to chocolate. And alive, we'll set to true. And that's it. Notice that class variables can be referenced from within a method, and that's because this method is actually part of this class. And that's how you create a constructor. Let's go ahead and create one more constructor. So again, public keyword, name of the class, and notice if we try to create the exact same method again, it's going to complain and say, hey, you've got a duplicate method here, but we can overload this method and pass parameters. So let's go ahead and pass it the age, and we'll pass it the color, and we'll tell whether or not the dog is alive. So here's something that is going to happen that's interesting. If I type age in between these two braces, there's going to be a little bit of a competition, right? Because it could be referencing the age as this basically a reference to this variable, or rather this parameter, or it could reference the age as a variable of the class. It turns out that in order to, if we ever encounter a situation where it's unclear, it's best to use the this keyword. And that's done by saying this dot, and then Eclipse should help you. I hear my computer thinking hard. There we go. And Eclipse will try to automatically complete what you want. This dot age is equal to age. So what I've done here, this keyword basically means that it's referencing this class. And so when you do this dot age, you're actually referencing this class, and then the period says look for a variable within this class called age, and because of course there is one, it found it, and so our code compiles, there's no red errors. And then notice that the second age is actually referencing the parameter. And so let's go ahead and do this with the rest of our variables. And our second constructor is complete. And it's okay to have two constructors. That is fairly common. Alright, the next thing I want to cover is methods. So let's go ahead and make a method that increases the dog's age by 1, and let's call it grow. So we'll say it's a public method. Well, it is not going to return anything, and we'll call it grow up. And the whole purpose of this method is to take the age of the dog and increase it by 1. Remember, the plus plus shortcut basically is equivalent to doing this dot age is equal to this dot age plus 1. It's the same functionality. It's just a shortcut. Also notice that I decided to use this dot age even though there was no reason to. I could have just said age plus plus and it would have still referenced the class variable age. It's up to you how you want to do it. Some people get picky about coding standards and how they write their code. I'm more lenient, I guess, so I'm just going to leave this off. Let's live dangerously. So when this when this method is called, it will increase the age of this dog by 1. And so now what we want to do is we want to be able to determine what the age of the dog is. So let's go ahead and create another public method called getAge, and it will just return the age of this class. The last thing I want to talk about is the public keyword. It's either public or private. You can choose either or, and what public means is that when you are outside of this code block, you can actually call the method or variable if it has the public keyword in front of it. Since I don't want any of my class variables to be able to be called outside the class, I'm going to put the private keyword. So let's go ahead and do one last thing, and let's make a private method called, it's going to be a void method, and we'll call it aged. And what we want to do here is we want to take the color of the dog and we want to set this string value to be equal to the dog is going to gray as it gets older. So we're going to take that string, our current string value, and set it to be equal to grayish plus color. So for example, if the dog's initial color is chocolate, when this method is called, its color will become a grayish chocolate. And this will happen when the dog reaches a certain age. So we probably need to do this check when the age has increased. And let's say that a dog will start to go gray when it reaches 70 in dog years, which is 7 in people years. And so that is going to be if age is equal to 7, we'll call the aged function or aged method. Okay, so this is a good enough example. Let's go back to our hello world main and let's actually use the dog class. We'll keep our initial hello world printout, and we need to make an instance of the dog class. I'll just go ahead and type it up and explain what's happening. Okay, so the way you declare an instance of a class is the same way you would basically declare a variable, with one exception. You need to create a new instance of the class, which is what this new keyword means. But everything else is the same. So you declare your type. It's of type dog, and that has to match your class name. And then you name your variable. So in this case, our variable is named dog, and if I wanted to do, reference the variable here, I would just type dog to reference that variable, the same way normal variables work. The next thing I want to do is I want to declare a new place in memory that stores this dog, so we can say, and that's what this new keyword is for, and then we just call dog and we need to initialize it. So that's why we're calling the dog constructor, and we're using the default constructor here. So basically when we do this, let's do a printout statement, and we'll find out the age of this dog. Okay, so if you call the default constructor, the age should be 0 because we're setting it to 0 here. And this is the constructor that's getting called. There's no parameters here, so that's the constructor that's getting called. Down here, the way I checked the age was I actually called I used the reference to the dog instance of the dog class, and I did dot get age. What that dot meant is it basically says anything that is public within that class I can now access. And so because the getAge method was public, I'm able to call it. And what this does is it returns the age class class variable, for dog, and that is going to be 0 in this case because it was just set by the default constructor. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. It says hello world, and sure enough then our age is 0. Alright, so let's get a little bit more fancy. Let's go ahead and make another dog, and we'll call it doggy2. And this time, instead of calling the default constructor, let's go ahead and call our second constructor. So how I did this in Eclipse, the default key combination is when you're trying to call any method, whether it be a constructor or any other method, and you don't know what the parameters are, if you hold the control button and hit the spacebar key, it offers choices that you can use. So we're going to use the non-default constructor, which is this one. So you just go ahead and use the arrow keys or the mouse to select it, and then hit enter. And you'll see that that little helper window pops up saying first you need to enter the age. Go ahead and enter 6. Then we'll enter, let's have a green dog. That sounds fun. And the dog, yes, let's say the dog's alive. Okay, so let's just try that, and then let's try and get the doggie's age. We'll go ahead and do doggy2.getAge. And we're going to need one more method here. We're going to need a getColor method that basically returns the color of the dog. And so we'll do a system.out.println doggie's color. And then we're going to call that method by using a reference to the doggy2 variable, and then doing dot getColor, the name of the method. Alright, and then after that, let's go ahead and let's tell that doggy to grow up. And then let's go ahead and get the doggie's age again, which we would expect to increase by 1. And the color will change too, because now the dog should be 7, right? Okay, so let's look what's happening here. So this doggy2.growup, that's actually going to call this growup method. The way I did that was I held the control button and then clicked on the method, and that just takes me to where the method declaration is, or implementation is. And so what we've done here is you can see exactly what's going to happen. The age is going to be 6 at the start because the age will be set to 6 here. And then later on, when we tell that dog whose age is 6 to grow up, he's going to turn 7, which is going to then cause this if statement to evaluate to true. And then we're going to call this private method, and we're going to modify the color of the dog, and we're going to print out both the dog's age and color. One last thing I want to do is I want to also print out the value of dog at the very end again. And the reason why I want to do this is because I want to show that this doggy and this dog are two different things. So this dog's color is going to be chocolate and its age is going to be 0, and this dog's color is going to be green, and its age is going to be 6, and then after our grow up method call it's going to be 7, and it's going to be a grayish green, but that doesn't relate to the other one, dog, because we never did anything with that one. We just checked its age in the beginning. And so what I'm trying to show here is that these are two separate instances of the same class. And because they are two separate instances, they have different places in memory, and so it's actually storing the age and the color and whether the dog's alive twice because they're separate. And so what we've done here is this would be basically the same as us saying in the real world, well, I have two dogs. One is younger, the other one's older. One is green, the other one is chocolate. And that would be kind of how I model that in code, for example. So let's go ahead and click Run. And sure enough, everything we thought would happen happened. We see that Doggie's age is initially 6, his color is green because we called the constructor where we set our values, and then we called the grow up method, and then after that we checked his age and color again, and sure enough, the age increased by 1, his color changed to grayish green, and then lastly we checked our first dog, and who just used the default constructor, which again was chocolate and an age of 0 and also alive. We haven't really done anything with the alive boolean yet. And we see that our initial doggie's age is 0 and the color is chocolate. And I forgot to say that in the printout statement. So let's go ahead and run it again. There we go. That's what it should look like. And so that's it. In this episode of Java Programming Tutorials for Beginners, I have shown how to use classes. I've covered the basic syntax to get you started. I've shown how to instantiate an instance of a class, how to reference public methods and variables within that class. I've shown how to call methods of a class that affect other variables within the class. And this is pretty much all you need to know to hit the ground running. So if you want to know more, check out my next video, which is going to explore some of the more advanced topics for a class. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Till next time.